Great news! The World Health Organization will not recommend a kratom ban. In July 2021, the WHO announced new substances including kratom would be considered for critical review at the 44th meeting of the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence. They met in October, and they just released their decision here in early December. Quote, the committee considered information regarding traditional use and investigation into possible medical applications of kratom. The committee concluded that there is insufficient evidence to recommend a critical review of kratom. None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any pages of the website kratomscience.com should be considered medical claims or medical advice. This is the Kratom Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for kratomscience.com. Your source for all things kratom. My guest is Dru Clay. Not that Dru Clay, but he's named after him. Dru is a lifelong martial arts guy, boxing trainer, into sports medicine and psychology, currently works for Mitrespec, and has been a kratom consumer for nearly 10 years. This is Dru Clay, and this is his kratom story. You live in Reno, Nevada now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Originally from Modesto, California. I've been in Reno for about 8 years or so now.
Boxing trainer there? Is that what you do?
Yeah, I was. I've done a little bit of everything as far as gyms go. I have managed some. I've trained at others. Just regular like weightlifting gyms to martial arts gyms, karate gyms, taekwondo, boxing gyms, kickboxing. But for about the last year or so, I've just been working with Mitrespec and just kind of doing training and martial arts and stuff as fun on the side. The owners and founders, their names are Sarah and Dan Pitta. They're husband and wife, and they founded it in 2015. And then back when I was an athlete my whole life, so I was always, involved with stuff like that. And as I got more familiar with kratom and started advocating it more, they found me and sponsored me back in 2016 or 2017. And then once I kind of put competing with sports and stuff on the back burner and started focusing more on this, they brought me on as the VP and the athlete coordinator. So I just basically handle all of, social media, emails, things like that. And then I handle all of the athlete sponsorships that we do.
Yeah, that's cool. I saw that there was Frank Mir.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's a legend. He's been around since I was a young man when I first kind of got serious into mixed martial arts. It was mixed martial arts wasn't called that back in the day. It was kind of something that came about over time as the sport grew. But he was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He was a really young man when he first won the UFC championship. He's been through a lot, and he had some setbacks, we'll say, in his life that he ended up kind of dealing with things, the way that we all do. But he came across kratom and came across us. I want to say 4 or 5 years ago or so, and he's been one of the main sponsored athletes for a while. He's done so much to help us out, and he's just, me as a kid growing up watching him, it's just, it's surreal to get to work with, really cool people like that, people that I've always looked up to. And he's one of the ones that knows how to put stuff out there and, advertise, and he's not ashamed or afraid to, let you know about his story. And, you and I know in this realm, that's important. And not everybody is willing to, share the things that they've been through like that. So he's really helped the community and us out a lot.
Did you get first into MMA or boxing? Just how did you get into all that?
So I was first introduced to training martial arts when I was 4 years old. I grew up in a rough part of Modesto, so there was some childhood squabbles and stuff that led my parents to wanting to get me into something that would help me learn how to defend myself and help me just, feel more comfortable and confident with myself. And they got me into karate and taekwondo around 4 years old. I started competing doing karate and taekwondo for up until about 10 years old. And then that's when I got a little bit more familiar with different disciplines like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I had an uncle who was a wrestler, and I had another uncle who was a boxer. So they always kind of, tried to push me towards their favorite discipline. Yeah. And I've always, not ashamed to admit that I've always wanted to be a Ninja Turtle ever since I was a kid. So that's played a big part in my ninja upbringing. But as I kind of developed into a young man in high school, I began working more with the mixing of all the disciplines instead of trying to just focus on one certain one. And that's kind of where my love and passion for it stemmed from. But as far as sports and like doing competitive things outside of school and stuff like that, I've been one of those kids who was always doing something, some kind of sport, some kind of after school athletic, physical activity type stuff. That was always kind of my outlet away from stuff like, regular life stuff happening, and you need a way to kind of cut out and get away from life stuff. It's always been, martial arts and sports, basketball, soccer, things like that.
Did you ever fight professionally or do tournaments or anything like that?
No, I've never done anything professionally. I've done what they call like exhibition fights. So, so a lot of people know them as smokers. Those were the things that I did as far as mixed martial arts and kickboxing. As far as karate and taekwondo, I did a lot of those tournaments growing up. I was kind of, on the smaller side. So competing a lot was important for me so that, the more you do something, the more you get comfortable with it. So on the karate taekwondo competitions, I did, I can't even remember a number on those. And then as far as mixed martial arts competition, it was nothing of any relevance, just exhibition fights.
I mean, a lot of people that in any kind of athletics really, but I guess especially some of these like martial arts and boxing deal with a lot of pain and injuries and stuff like that. In your experience, do a lot of people have a lot of pain medicine issues?
Oh, 100%, man. Yeah. That's kind of, I wouldn't say the main reason. I think, there's a lot of different main reasons that kind of got me towards doing what I do with my life now. But that was one of the big ones for sure is just being an athlete on that side of it, where, you're kind of involved with sports. You see the things that happen in the locker rooms, you see what's happening in training, you see what's happening in practices. A lot of the stuff that just sports watchers, like people who watch it for entertainment, aren't really aware of. Having a lot of that like insights kind of molded a different perspective on things for me as I was growing up. I was always into sports psychology, sports medicine. That's what I majored in college for a little bit. And it's one of those things that, the more that you delve into it, the more that you see that there's a lot of things like substance abuse. There's a lot of just like tragic stuff that I've always felt like it could be avoided, but it's something that isn't really like talked about. It's something that is like encouraged in certain sports. It's kind of swept under the rug. It's looked away from, and it really like it does a toll on people's lives in the long run, not just in their competitive lives, but life outside of sports, off the field, off the cage, off the mats, off the court, whatever it is they're doing. They have a life that they need to lead away from sports. And a lot of those, injuries that people accrue throughout time, like add up to substantial amounts of pain later on, even if they're not competing anymore, even if they're not working out, if they're not training still. There's a lot of people who still deal with the after effects of competition later on in life. And that's where things like pills, alcohol, performance enhancing drugs, things like that are, they're prevalent, and it does a lot more harm than good. As I kind of got away from competing, I saw things as I can do more for the world, do more to like help make this world a better place, do more to leave this world better than I found it, away from the field, away from competition, focusing on things like that, trying to get alternatives and more options and better help for athletes who are in pain, who are dealing with not just like physical injuries, but trauma that they accumulate over time with things like constantly having their body under stress, undersleeping, being under hydrated at times, a lot of things that add up over time can contribute to stress, trauma, anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, all the things that you want to do sports to help alleviate. All the time of like, fighters, and the ones that I've done the most research on as far as substance abuse have definitely been combat sports. So all different martial arts disciplines, mixed martial arts, and pro wrestling. I was a big pro wrestling fan growing up, and that's man, as much as it was an amazing thing to watch. A lot of these guys, I'm sure growing up too, there was at least one or two wrestlers that everybody looked up to. There was no way around it. Like people like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Randy Savage, Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle was a big one. He was an Olympic wrestler too.
Pittsburgh native.
Kind of transitioned from, yeah, buddy. There you go. And I read a lot of books on Kurt Angle growing up. I did a lot of, even as far back as like junior high, I was always interested in the parts of things like that I wasn't familiar with. So even though, I have never been encouraging of things like performance enhancing drugs, or I've never had any aspirations or anything to like ever use them myself, I still wanted to know as much as I could about them, and so just things like that kind of led to a lot more insight to what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on, in the locker rooms, away from the lights and away from competition for a lot of these athletes. And especially with pro wrestling. Pro wrestling is one of the like worst substance abuse problems that of any sports. And it's sad because it's just, these guys that we looked up to, a lot of these people who put their bodies physically, there's a lot of people who say like, I've beat my body up over the years with, doing whatever they're doing. Pro wrestlers and fighters, boxers, wrestlers, jiu-jitsu practitioners, they are literally beating their body up over the years, so having to hear stories like Jake the Snake Roberts and Diamond Dallas Page, all of these guys that, were encouraged to, abuse substances in order to keep themselves going. I just, over time, it adds up. And I feel like a lot of it could be avoided if they just knew, that there's options like DDP yoga. I don't think anybody was encouraging the wrestlers to do yoga back in the 80s and 90s,
really. We actually have the DVD set here too.
Nice.
I gotta get back into it.
I've seen some like testimonials and whatnot on them. I haven't been able to actually try that out myself.
It's kind of like a cross between yoga and like football calisthenics, because I played football, so it's kind of like it's a lot of that, and then you do the diamond cutter, but you definitely feel it. You get to do the poses and stuff. Hulk it out some move.
feel free to update me on, any findings, any feelings and thoughts that you have on it, because I'm always interested for sure.
And I actually met him. We used to go, because my best friend's like a huge wrestling nerd. We used to go down to the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh and wait after the shows, after the matches, and we met Diamond Dallas Page one time. He was definitely the coolest person we met. Definitely. He's the nicest guy. And he was a bad guy. He was like a bad guy manager at the time, but yeah, he was definitely the coolest. So, did you have any of those injuries and stuff that you used any opioids or anything for? I'm just wondering kind of like how your path toward Kratom, or is that just something you studied in other athletes?
Oh yeah. So I love telling the story of how I discovered Kratom, because so many people are surprised by it. So I absolutely accumulated my fair share of injuries over time. When I got to, I want to say 7th or 8th grade ish, was when the doctors first diagnosed me with scoliosis. They said that it was to a point where I think the degree at the time was like in the low 40s. They said that it was something that I was most likely born with and just didn't know that I had. So over time, it would just progressively get a little worse as I grew up. So I've always kind of dealt with back, neck pain to an extent. But then as far as sports were concerned, training, martial arts is always a little bit of damage going on. Like there's always, it's something that, fighters don't really talk about a lot, because it's kind of detrimental to leading up to competition. Very rarely does anybody compete in stuff like that without some kind of injury going on, whether it's a new one or an old one. There's a lot of broken hands, broken foot bones, back, neck, shoulder, knees, hips, things like that, just over time kind of start to break down a little bit more and more. As far as like basketball, I got broken ankle, fractured fingers, things like that. With martial arts, I got broken ribs at one point. And of course the overall like damage that you take from just getting hit in the head for years and years on end. I did my best to wear headgear and protective gear, which I always encourage everybody to use. But growing up as a kid, you feel like you're indestructible. There's a lot of it's the same feeling as wearing a helmet when you ride a bike. You kind of only do it to please your parents, so your mom isn't getting mad at you. But it takes a toll. It takes a toll, whether you're getting hit with, some headgear on, even thick, like boxing headgear. If you take enough damage, take enough hits to it, it'll rattle you around a little bit. When I was in my senior year at high school, I was 17 years old. The thing that actually first got me introduced to opiates was a pretty bad car accident I was in. One day I was driving from Ceres back to my home in Turlock, and we had a tire blowout, and it was me and my sister. I was picking her up from church youth group in Ceres. The tire blew out, and we kind of skidded across the freeway into an embankment. And it was, I don't remember too much of it. I remember kind of what happened as the tire blew out, as we were, crossing the freeway. But I'm not sure really what happened after that. I just remember waking up and we were in a ditch. My sister, I was checking on my sister, make sure she's okay. There were people, passerbys, who stopped and came over to help us out. But after that was the first time that I actually went to a doctor, and they prescribed me something for the pain. It kind of jacked my back and my neck up just a little bit more than it already was. And once I got an idea of how I felt with the opiates, that was a tough feeling to give up. So there was a lot of years trying to find ways to take away pain without damaging like my organs, without having the effects of an addiction where you constantly just worried about where you're going to be able to get it next, making sure you don't run out, worrying about like social settings and things like that, not wanting to go. If I didn't have something to help with pain, I didn't, feel like doing anything. There was no motivation to kind of get up and attack the day like I'm used to doing. And for me, it was always like a not so much of wanting to chase a high or party or, experiment with stuff the way a lot of kids did. I was just kind of hooked on not being in pain all the time. And so it was a bit, I'd say like 6 years or so of just being on pills, dabbling into a lot of other stuff like alcohol, looking to always make sure that I'm fueling that need to find something and have something to help alleviate pain. And then as I did my research, like I always do, I always look into things a little bit more in depth than everybody does initially. I figured out, all the effects that long-term use of those pharmaceuticals and alcohol and things like that have on like your liver, your kidneys, your mental state, everything is a little bit of relief comes with a lot of sacrifices in other places that you gotta bite the bullet and take. And so it became a way, like a passion of mine to find alternatives to things that people normally abuse and think that it's like a good thing. If, a doctor prescribes it to you, then it must be good. As I was always an avid mixed martial arts fan. I was an avid stand-up comedy fan growing up. I was actually named after Andrew Dice Clay.
Nice.
I'm not sure if you remember him.
Oh yeah. I remember him.
He's tough to forget.
Yeah.
I was actually I think like about 5 years old when I first saw one of his specials, and that was kind of gives you an idea of the childhood that I had growing up. I was also a big Joe Rogan fan for, I'd say, the duration of his career since people have known him when he was on talk radio or news radio. And then he began doing more stand-up. He got like on Fear Factor, things like that. I'd always followed him, and I'd followed his podcast on YouTube ever since it started.
Yeah.
And in, what was it? It was May 13th, 2012. It was an episode with the great Chael Sonnen. He mentioned Kratom. He called it Kratom about, I'd say like, I don't know, no more than like 2 or 3 minutes into the podcast.
Yeah.
And the way that they were speaking on same things that we kind of dabble in with pharmaceuticals, things that are considered drugs, things that are considered good because a doctor gives them to you, things that are considered legal and not legal, what is morally more viable options of things. And he mentioned Kratom. He mentioned that there was like a coffee shop, a drive-through coffee shop or something that sold Kratom, and people would line up around the block, and said you could tell that he didn't have as much information as we do now looking back on it, but he described it, the best way that he knew how, which was it's a painkiller and it's legal, and it's something that the government hasn't caught on to yet. So they don't tax it or, have clinics and stuff for it that people are required to go get stuff from. And that was 2012. Going on a decade ago. Yeah. That was my number one absolute very first time ever hearing the word Kratom or having any idea that it even existed. And so, and it came right at a time when I was desperately searching for any kind of alternatives, anything other than what I was doing, what I was like, the options that I was given at that time. And that was a godsend. If I ever meet him, I gotta thank him for that.
Yeah, I can't believe it was that early that they mentioned that on Joe Rogan. That's pretty interesting. It's
always, surprising when people hear that it came from that, given that, how big Joe Rogan's podcast is now. It's people don't realize how long they've been trying to essentially, do the same that we do, where we don't really take what we are told or the options we are given as, the end all be all. We look into stuff, we kind of delve in and discuss with other people who are, like-minded and into, kind of getting down deeper into things. And it was a blessing for me. I went and looked up Kratom at the time. And there was only in Modesto, where I'm from, there was only 2 shops in downtown Modesto that had any Kratom at all or any mention of it. And They were both like head shops, smoke shops, and had a very limited selection. The people working there, great people, of course, but didn't know really anything about it. So they didn't have too much information to offer on it. And that was the start of my Wild West period, where I kind of had to go through and start diving deeper into as much as I could find out about Kratom, do my diligence with it. And ever since then, I used it as an alternative. It's what helped me get off of pills, what helped me, give up doing anything else to help alleviate the chronic pain every day, and help do things like get rid of alcohol, quit smoking cigarettes. There's, a lot of people that I know use it as in place of coffee these days, kind of waking up and giving them a little energy. Like I said before, I got a lot of main reasons why I do stuff. That's another reason that I do what I do, is to help educate people as to how it can be used, what it can be used for, what's safe, what's not safe. A lot of the stuff that you yourself have given me and so many other people so much information on. I tell people all the time, I got about 70% of my knowledge on Kratom from experience. All the other rest of the experience I got has essentially come from you and everything that you do with your podcast and your website,
man, thanks.
interviews and the articles. And hey, the pleasure's all mine. It's been wonderful to make your acquaintance. And, as you know, we, the advocates in this space, are not necessarily, competitive, but there's always a little bit of competition in every realm that you're in. And it's nice to have people like yourself, people like, our mutual friends, Misty, people that we're all kind of in of the same mindset, where we're not looking to gain anything from any of this that we do. All that we're looking to do is give people the information that we wish we had at that point in time in our lives. And if I would have had your podcast and your website going on back when in 2012, when I first heard it, there'd be a lot of pitfalls and stuff that I could have avoided for sure.
Yeah, there's two guys that I work for on this website that started it, but they started, I think, 2013, but I don't think they had as much information on it back then. They were probably learning themselves. But yeah, 2012, that's coming up on 9 years that you've used Kratom, right? Is that right? And so were you on like a lot of opioids or anything like when you started doing that? And did you have to like taper off one thing before you started the Kratom, or?
The first opiates that I was introduced to were the old school hydrocodone. They were called Vicodin back in the day. There was 1,000 milligrams. They were the little yellow ones. They were by far my favorite. I think back then they were on the strongest side of the opiates that they produced at that time. Over time, I got introduced to OxyContin, Percocet, pretty much any of the generic versions of any of those. The worst I would say that I did was the 80 milligram OxyContins. That was kind of in the time when those were exploding across the country and becoming a big problem for people my age and people, dealing with pain at that time. There was things going on like the OxyContin Express that we can learn about now, where doctors were essentially just taking money under the table in exchange for prescriptions. So things like that were not difficult to get. And so those were the main culprits that I was turning to for pain relief. Kind of had the same essential story where, you use it properly at first, and then it kind of stops working as well. So you start to get the dosage increased, and then eventually you just start increasing the dosage yourself without consulting the doctor. That snowball effect starts to take hold, where you start needing more and more. You start losing the areas of your life that once were important in that's now been replaced with making sure that you have this substance at all times. As far as illicit drugs, I experimented with a few of those. Those weren't anything that I did prevalently or very often, but for the majority of the, what was it, like 6 years or so, it was just whatever Vicodin, whatever OxyContin, whatever kind of anything similar to those that I could. Man, I've tried just about everything under the sun. I've tried tramadol, Flexeril, methadone. Gosh, it was way too easy for people to be able to get a hold of stuff like that back then. So there was quite a few of them that I was, all somebody had to do was call me up and say, "Hey, I got these," and I was like, "All right, I'm on my way."
Did you quit the opiate stuff first and then start to Kratom, or did you kind of like gradually introduce that?
So what I did initially was I would use the Kratom in place of pain medication whenever I ran out.
Yeah.
And that would, take care of things like withdrawal symptoms. It would help to manage the pain, not as well as the opiates did. Because, of course, the receptors were overfilled with stuff at the time. Yeah. So kind of bouncing back and forth. I wasn't really, I was kind of just doing trial by fire stuff.
Yeah.
So the first year or two was a little bit of a transition period where I had to figure out that in order to move from the opiates to just relying on Kratom, I had to figure a year or two where I had to kind of bump down the usage of the opiates and then bump up the usage of the Kratom. And I'd say about 1.5 years, 2 years in is when I realized that the more that I keep using the opiates, the less effective that the Kratom is going to be. So that's when I decided, okay, I'm gonna cut all of the opiates. I'm going to use the Kratom just to combat the withdrawals so that I could just, I would still be in some pain, still, have a little rough time moving around, but it wouldn't be as bad and I wouldn't be having to deal with any withdrawal symptoms. After, maybe a month or two, a couple months of that, once my body and my receptors and everything started clearing out, that's when the Kratom started to become more effective. And that's when I was able to kind of work on a dosage plan or like a game plan for instead of, having a certain amount of opiates to take at a certain time, this many times a day. I kind of come up with a protocol for myself using just Kratom. And at that time, it was a lot more difficult to get a hold of. So it took a lot of planning to make sure that I didn't run out, make sure that there wasn't going to be any hiccups in the protocol. But it was definitely a process, and it did take some tapering. And the longer off of the illicit drugs and alcohol and things like that, the more effective that Kratom will become in time.
How do you take Kratom? Do you do a tea or do you do it in capsules or mix it with something else?
Well, when I first got into it, the only thing that I could find was capsules. So I started out, I'd say it was maybe 4 or 5 years of just doing the capsules before there was more information coming out from people who were also using it on how they used it. And I started discovering, how people make tea with it, people using it in things like smoothies and juice and things like that to eliminate the bitter taste of it. The first time that I used it with just powder, where I used the method of toss and wash, the effects were pretty substantially higher, and it seemed to absorb in my body and take effect quicker. Yeah. So ever since then, I've just been a toss and wash kind of guy. Sometimes I will, if I make a smoothie with like fruits and stuff like that can help to eliminate the bitter taste of it, I'll mix it in there. But for the most part, I just toss and wash whenever I need to. It's much easier and better if you are, not familiar with toss and wash. It's easier to just mix it into a drink and just, chug it or sip on it. I know a lot of people who prefer to just drink it in a way that they don't taste it. Over time, the taste doesn't really bother me anymore. It's one of those acquired tastes.
Yeah.
But it seems to be a little bit more effective for me to do the toss and wash method. So I generally just go with powder. And if I'm doing something like traveling, or if I'm somewhere where doing a toss and wash or having powder around is kind of inconvenient, then I'll still keep some capsules with me.
I mean, you're in the sports world, and do most people, like athletes, use it for energy, like before a workout, or is it mostly the pain killing effect?
I would say mostly the pain killing effect.
Yeah.
But I do have, excuse me, there's quite a few athletes that I've worked with over the years. The company that I'm with, Nutrispec, we were actually the first company to sponsor professional athletes.
Yeah.
The main athletes that we sponsor are combat sports athletes, MMA fighters, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, wrestlers, things like that. And I would say 80% of them use it for pain relief for, after hard workouts. Yeah. Bodybuilders specifically are one of the ones that are constantly putting their body in a state of soreness, so breaking down muscles, trying to recover and build them back up, and then going and doing it again. There's a lot of people who use it just for like post-workout to combat soreness and things like that. But I do have quite a few, I've met quite a few individuals who use it for things like stress and anxiety of like competing, or like social anxieties, things like that. Kind of helps them to not be so like on edge when they're around people. I know some people who use it pre-workout, use it to kind of give them a little bit of energy and focus when they're doing things where they don't want to take like a pre-workout that's going to increase your heart rate a whole bunch, or essentially dehydrate you if you don't hydrate properly. Definitely the pain relief is probably the number one thing.
There's a Reddit r quitting Kratom. There's a lot of people that say they're getting severely addicted, that you're having withdrawals. Like, have you ever had any of that type of experience with Kratom? And if not, like, what do you make of people that are saying, it's just as bad as opiates for me and stuff like that?
That is an area where I feel people like myself, yourself, the advocates for it are crucial, because that is where I think a lot of people are just lacking a lot of information, especially people who have zero information about Kratom and just get introduced to it by somebody recommending it. They see a video online, they hear somebody at the gym say that they're using it, or they just happen to come across it in a shop somewhere. I have for sure experienced withdrawal symptoms when quitting Kratom, but there's also a lot of tangibles that people need to take into account. At the times, looking back, knowing what I know now, I know that during those times I was taking much more Kratom than I needed to. I was not fueling my body properly. I wasn't focused on staying properly hydrated. I wasn't eating properly. I wasn't sleeping properly. I wasn't getting too much. I mean, I've always exercised. I've always been a real physical guy. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I do have some form of ADD, because it's really hard for me to sit still for too long. There was a lot of things that I can't look back on it and say that only taking Kratom was the cause of all this, if that makes sense. There's a lot of different things that come into play. What kind of Kratom you're taking, where you're getting it from, how much you're taking, how often you're taking it. All these things I wasn't very aware of at the time. So my answer is kind of like a yes and no, where yes, I have had effects like that. There are times when I have taken it and thrown up, but looking back, I know that it was because I was just taking way too much at a time. If I would have cut the dosage back substantially and, measured things out better, kept a little bit better log and idea of how often I was taking it, things like that, I feel like that all could have been avoided. as far as other people's experiences, there's a lot of them out there that can maybe sway people against Kratom or turn them off of it if they were already using it. I don't mean to sound as if I'm discrediting anybody else's experience, but in my experience, anytime I try to dive deeper into those instances, as I'm used to doing, I don't get a lot of pertinent information back on those instances. So, for example, anybody who comments on the TikTok videos like, "Oh, the withdrawals are worse than any other drug that I did. I had to go back to opiates just to get off of Kratom," and things like that. Those are the people that I kind of sympathize with them. I empathize with them, but I don't just leave it like that at face value. I always try to ask them deeper questions like, well, how much were you taking? Where did you get it from? What other things were you taking? Which is always, seems to be a common problem in those instances. But I don't just write off anybody's negative experiences, but I also am just like yourself. I'm the kind of guy who can't really just take things at face value. I need to kind of get a little bit more deeper into it to understand and to be able to make an accurate judgment and assumption on what actually happened and if Kratom was to blame. The worst thing that I've ever experienced is the throwing up at times. That's only happened maybe once or twice in my life, and it was, knowing what I know now, like I said, it's obvious what the problem was. I was just, taking too much. I didn't have an idea of how much was a proper dosage or what each individual kind would do as far as effects generally. I absolutely feel for anybody who has lost anybody in their life, lost a loved one where, Kratom was in some way, shape, or form involved. Those ones are difficult to address the way that we address them because not too many people are looking to answer any questions on losing a loved one and things like that. So, we get stuck looking at things like autopsy reports online and just going off of people's firsthand words and statements about it. But I feel like if there was a lot more available information, a lot more like readily available, reliable places for people to get it back, in the day as there was now, I don't think that there would be as much of those negative experiences floating around.
Yeah, and I wish, like, with a lot of the deaths where they have Kratom, even, the coroner's telling the families, well, this is a Kratom overdose, when you look at it closer and you find out it's multi-drug, but I it's always up in the air because I wish I could get on here and have a whole podcast about how to avoid dying while you're taking Kratom. I mean, number one, don't take any other drugs that would kill you on your own because that's where most of those reports are from. But
100%.
But it's like these questions are unanswered, and after like reading Carl Hart's book, it happens with a lot of drugs too. Like it's not necessarily always a drug overdose, just because a coroner who's either elected or even if he's qualified, he's under a deadline to determine cause of death. And maybe he has a couple other bodies to look at that day. It's like the harsh reality. But there's no like scientific method. We even know that if you have a heroin overdose, it's respiratory depression. But we don't know, other than taking so much that it becomes toxic, like a water toxicity, how Kratom actually would kill somebody if it could.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and history of safe use. But you were talking about dosing, so like how much for you is like an average dose?
Right now, I have always, been of the mind of moderation with everything. Mm-hmm. So making sure that I keep, not just things that I ingest, but everything in life in moderation. I think that's a real important thing for people to learn and to apply to their lives. Mm-hmm. Once I realized that this was something that I needed to make sure that I'm moderating properly. My dosages went down a lot, and it became much more effective for me. We hear a lot of people say in this community, less is more, and that really is very, very important information to have. The first maybe year or so, I was taking anywhere from 5 to 10 grams at a time. And that wasn't, doing anything detrimental to me, but it was not something that was ideal or like smart to do every single day and multiple times a day. Over time, it just, adds up, and you get, what we know as the wobbles. So as time has gone on, I have dialed my dosages down into smaller dosages and just broke it up more throughout the day. So for example, this morning when I wake up, I will do, I like to do blends. I like to do a white and a green daily. The first dose that I'll take when I first wake up will be maybe 2 or 3 grams. And then about, 30, 45 minutes to an hour after that one has digested, I will do another 2 grams. And that's pretty much all that I need for about half the day up until, 2:30, 3 o'clock or so, depending on what time I get up. But generally, that's how my dosages will go, instead of taking, for example, like if I know that I operate best with 4 grams, I will do like 2 grams now, 2 grams in half an hour, 45 from now. Even, when you are kind of doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, there's a lot of, upkeep with your body that I think a lot of us take for granted and neglect, and just, being aware enough and being mindful enough to know that you need to stop drinking or, cut back on anything like that. Getting your blood work done, things like that. I just got my blood work done about a month or 2 ago also. And that's, keeping track of your body and keeping track of what's going on with it, getting checkups, getting blood work, getting tests and things like that done. That's important for anybody. But, once you have, something like Kratom worked into your routine, it becomes, even more important. Something that I always encourage people to do is, if you're thinking about, trying to implement Kratom into your routine for whatever reason, definitely go make sure that you get an idea where you're at health-wise and what other changes that you need to do. Because a lot of times, people might have, chronic pain from things like inflammation, from just, eating terribly, eating nothing but processed foods and sugar and things like that. And just cutting sugar out of people's diets could help to reduce, inflammation and pain and things like that immensely without having to, resort to any other kind of substances and stuff. And that's, I always encourage people that same way. Make sure you take breaks, moderation. You don't want to constantly be at a point where you are fiending for something where you feel like you can't live your life without it. That's one of the wonderful things about Kratom for me is, at any point I take a break. I can go without it. If I, go somewhere where, like I said, it's going to be a little difficult to do a toss and wash right there in the middle of everything. I don't have to worry about, going into really bad withdrawals as I did with things like alcohol and opiates. And I don't have to worry about my pain coming back to excruciating levels if I don't constantly have this with me. And that's, something that I couldn't really say about, the other stuff that I was using. It's a lot of like mental stuff too. It kind of rewires your brain and your way of thinking. And, being able to rewire it back to what it is normally is very important. And there's definitely a need for people to know this isn't, something that you go to the doctor for and then they prescribe it to you and you have to take this every single day for the rest of your life. This is ultimately looking to help people get away from things like that. You know, I tell people I use Kratom the same way that anybody else uses ibuprofen. You know, it's not something that I'm constantly like, oh, I gotta have it. It's just, oh man, my back's kind of hurting. I kind of got a headache. I'm take a little bit of Kratom and feel better.
And so I was just going to ask about, so you're in Nevada. Is there any legal issues going on with Kratom there? I know there's legal recreational marijuana, so... But that doesn't always line up because Kratom's illegal in Denver, which is weird. But in the city,
right?
Yeah. So I talked to a couple Misty and Jacob Ringstad. They were talking about that, but you can basically still order it, buy it. Doesn't really matter. But so what's anything going on with Nevada?
Yeah, Jacob too. Since you mentioned it, he's a great dude. Great shout out to anybody in the Kratom community, everybody on TikTok, everybody who's with us on this journey. I love all those people. You guys are much appreciated. In Nevada, I believe it is a little bit more because they have a lot of companies that work with Kratom that are based out in Nevada. It's legal out here. Recreational marijuana is legal. But as far as I've known, like anytime, anything having to do with stuff like that in Nevada has even been, on the docket, it gets a lot of attention and a lot of people addressing it and trying to make sure that they put a stop to any shenanigans going on with it. Yeah. There's quite a few dispensaries. There's quite a few like specialty shops for Kratom that I see. There's a couple of them here. There's a few dispensaries here in Reno, and there's one, I know of one Kratom like specialty shop, like a legitimate shop that is, does everything that they're supposed to be doing and focuses solely just on Kratom. Most of the people that I come across either feel one way about it or another. There aren't too many people who aren't aware of Kratom at all, who just, decide, oh, I just, want to give it a try, or I just heard about it or anything. Pretty much everybody that I know that uses Kratom out here uses it freely, uses it openly, or they're just, somebody who decided that it's not for them. It's something that shouldn't be, pushed to the public or anything like that. I don't think that there's any worry about it getting banned in Nevada.
Yeah, and you know what? I just looked it up, and there actually was a Consumer Protection Act passed there in 2019. So that's good. That's good. There we go. It's usually at the beginning of the years when all the governments go into session, especially for the lesser populated states. So you have to watch them at the beginning of the year.
And everything going on with the WHO and the FDA overseas and stuff now, I think that's got
big
a lot
one.
Of people's attention. Yep. Hey, that's what we're here for, man. trying to fight the good fight.
Yeah. Oh, another question I always ask everybody is, do you have a doctor that you can talk to about Kratom?
I don't have one specifically myself. I actually just got a new doctor for the blood work and everything that I did recently. So I haven't had any face-to-face time with them yet. It's just been through online. It's called My Chart. It's like it's kind of like ever since COVID and the pandemic and stuff hit, they have ways of scheduling and doing online meetings and stuff. But I have actually spoke with a doctor. It was someone that a family member of mine was using for a long time. My experience with that doctor was pretty much, ideal for how we wish they would go about it. He just told me, honestly, I don't have any information on it. But if you have done your research, you've taken into account all of the pros and cons that you read of, if you have looked into it and it's not just something that you are, experimenting with, and if it helps you, then I'm not going to tell you not to use it. I can't recommend that you use it because I don't have any info on it. And then that individual actually went and did some research on their own time with it, and said that, they don't have any feelings towards it as far as, it being a positive and, wanting to recommend it to people. But he, wasn't able to say, I can't really tell you that it's bad. So that was awesome.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds like a progress a little bit. Because I know, some of them will probably just look at what the FDA says and say, yeah, I don't have any reason to disbelieve them.
Right.
But
right. And it's one of those other avenues as an advocate that we have to try to knock down that barrier and just get our foot in the door and, get people to listen to us, get people to actually sit down and have a conversation about it. And I think it'll happen. I'm hopeful that it'll happen. We've come this far, and I don't see anybody looking to let up anytime soon. And we got a lot of, I would say, for every, negative story or testimonial or propaganda that's out there, I would say that there's 10 people who will tell you their positive experiences from it. And I think that that's gone a long way for us as far as eliminating any of the false information or the misconceptions about it. It's like I said, man, I've been doing this for a while, and I've been a huge fan of yours and what you guys do, and
Thanks
I'm
so much.
always looking to support and help out the fellow advocates. I appreciate you having me on this, and getting to talk with you and get to know you and stuff. I consider you a friend in this, so anytime that I can help you out, I'm always here for you.
Hell yeah, likewise. Thank you, Dru Clay. We don't advertise and we don't ask for money on Kratom Science Podcast, but we do ask for your support. Please like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, and share the Kratom Science Podcast on your social media. Please ignore the propaganda and follow the science. The music is Risey. The song is called Memories of Thailand. The Kratom Science Podcast is written and produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.